Good evening and welcome to the third episode in this series on Gitano, and the first one in which we are going to be hacking on Gitano itself. We're going to split this up into three parts, and the first one of that is to set up my system for hacking on Gitano. So in the last videos we set up a local user called Git, and we installed Gitano into user local and set everything up to work with that. We still have that set up, and I can demonstrate that by asking Git, who am I? Now, everything in Gitano is keyed off the SSH authorized keys file. So that's how Gitano can identify the incoming connection, and it's how authorization and everything else is keyed. So let's have a little look at that file. You can see here that there are two key entries. The first one here is for my main user, and the second one is for the temp user that we created so that we could demonstrate things with an unprivileged user. As you can see, each one of these starts with user local lib gitano bin gitano auth. Gitano auth is the root of the way that Gitano is accessed remotely, and the user local indicates, of course, that we're using the installed version. It's going to be very easy for us to switch between these two versions, so let's very quickly switch to using the version of Gitano which is in my Git tree here. To do that, we simply run the update SSH command, giving it the root of the repositories. From there it will pick up the Gitano admin, and then it will find everything else and construct the authorized keys for us. So let's do that now. We've done that, and it says the authorized keys file has been updated, and if we now cat it, then you'll see that instead of user local lib gitano bin, we're using homd silvers gitano gitano bin. This means that when we SSH to git at localhost, we're going to be getting the Gitano auth from our Git tree, which means that we can hack on things. So let's do that now. We just SSH to git at localhost, who am I? Then a really obvious difference can be seen in that it no longer has example at the front. This is a change that I made last week. I got rid of the instance tag from the who am I information. I thought it looked better. We can demonstrate that we're not just running a different version, but we're actually running the live version that we can hack by making a quick change. So let's do that. If we go into lib gitano admin command for argument's sake, and we add in here, well, let's first see this text. So if we SSH to git at localhost help as, then we get the help for the as command. And if we just go, here is a modification, save that, and run it again, as you can see, our modification is through. So we're getting the live hacked version of Gitano as we're running. Let's just revert that and run again, and as you can see, that change is reverted. The next thing that I want to do is very briefly walk you through the Gitano codebase. This is going to be extremely brief, very rough look, but it'll give you an idea of where to start looking to find things. The first thing to look at is the bin directory. In here you can see the Gitano auth.in, Gitano postReceiveHook.in, pre-receive hook, setup, and update hook. The .in files are the versions you will find in the repository. The non.in files are built when we run make. In fact, if I run make clean and then ils bin, you'll see that they've gone. This backup file is still there, so let's just get rid of that so that we don't have anything confusing us. When we run make, we get this local version of Gitano built for us, and if we just open up one of those files, like the update SSH one, then you can see here that the local version is configured such that the library bin path is this local version, and the share path is this local version, and the package.path gets the local libraries. If instead we look at the version in user local lib, then you can see that the Gitano modules are installed into user local share, and so it doesn't need to insert a package path entry because that's part of the default Lua paths. And you can see that the lib bin path is user local lib Gitano bin, and the share path is user local share Gitano. So, with these local binaries, everything operates out of the Git tree. Gitano auth, as I said, is the root of all of Gitano's access over SSH. The post and pre-receive hooks and the update hooks are hooks that will be inserted into the Git repositories. In fact, those hooks will be symbolic links that Git will be using. Every time Gitano looks at a repository, it will update those hooks. So we don't have to worry about the fact that the hooks are going to be currently pointing at user local bin. In fact, we can just demonstrate that they are by having a quick look in home git repos gitano.git hooks. As you can see, they're pointing at the user local versions. But if I did ssh git at localhost ls, that's going to look through all of them. And as you can see now, they've been updated. Gitano will automatically update anything that it needs to anytime it actually touches a repository, and ls touches all of the repositories in order to be able to work out whether or not you have access. Now if we look at the lib directory, then you can see that there's a gitano.lua, which is simply a module that pulls in everything in the Gitano directory, and lib Gitano contains a whole bunch of things. We're just going to very briefly talk through these. We're not going to look too deeply into them. Actions are to do with hooks, and they're specifically to do with the actions that Gitano has to take on hooks. Command is the core of the Gitano command processing. Admin command and user command add on the commands to do with administering Gitano and the commands that users can use to look at things. Lace is the interface to Lace for Gitano, and Supple obviously is the interface to Supple. Log is the logging. Markdown is an import of a Markdown library that Gitano can use for processing your README files, which cgit will then use to display information. Repository is the repository data for Gitano, and we'll be looking at that one just a touch more, and util is just a bunch of utility functions. Outside of lib, there is also skell, which is a skeleton Gitano admin tree, which basically contains the core rule set that will be injected into a system when you run Gitano setup. Example contains some example hooks, which we'll look at in another video, and doc contains mostly man pages, and in fact at the moment just a Gitano setup man page. Later it may also contain a user manual. Let's have a quick look at config, which is the only .lua file that we haven't talked about yet. Config is what is managing the entirety of a Gitano configuration. This module handles parsing the Gitano admin repository. It handles parsing all of the user information. It can even write out new versions of that repository, as we've seen in previous videos. It also manages understanding where the repositories are and where the Gitano binaries are. If you recall, when we looked at the bin Gitano auth, it called gitano.config.libbinpath and gitano.config.sharepath to set that information up. The config code can also generate the SSH keys file, which we've seen before. In fact, you can see here the great big long format string for the key file. We'll have a brief look at Lace just now. The majority of the Lace interface for Gitano is a loader which can load new rules into the Lace context. This matcher, which is the way that we handle matching both directly with strings and also with Lua patterns, and then the set of things which you can match in your lace rule set. That's it. The compile rule set is just a wrapper around lace's compiler, combined with understanding the difference between a nascent repository and a real repository, and that's it. Finally, we load global core, which is core.lace from the Gitano admin rules. Supple, the interface to supple, this is a little bit stranger, and if we go to the bottom first, then when we run a hook, we simply ask supple immediately to run. The hook is given this strange looking chunk of code. You can see here this marker is a long string, so this is actually a string, and that is the code that supple runs. And quite simply that provides a require function and then handles calling the global hook and chaining it into the local hook. It's that simple. Supple set globals allows us to pass additional stuff into supple, and the actions module is part of what will give us that. And then load module and load module source are basically what is called from here. Nice and simple. Load repo module can load code out of a repository. And then the final little bits are this repo proxy here, which is for producing a read-only variant of a repository. And the purpose of that is simply so that we can pass over a handle to our repository into the hook and know that it will be securely handled. All our proxied repositories are allowed to do is retrieve objects from the Git repository, retrieve the configuration, and list the configuration. That's it. But this is enough for most hooks to be implemented inside supple. So let's actually look at making a real change to Gitano and fix a bug or a problem that already exists and that we know is a problem. If you go to the Gitano website, then you'll find that there is a link Gitano on Trello, and if you open that up, then you'll see my Trello board for Gitano. Let's just shush the little doggy. There is a bug, and here it is. If you run Gitano as something, when the user does not exist, we get a traceback. And this is a bug that was actually reported by a colleague of mine because we encountered it at work. So we're going to try and fix this. Let's first of all try and reproduce it. As Badger, who am I? There's a traceback. And the traceback is in user command at line 41, attempt to index local user data, a nil value. This probably means that we're having something is not detecting that that username doesn't exist. Because if we run as temp, we get the information. Now what happens if, when we are temp, we try to run an as command on a user that doesn't exist? Let's just check that out. We get told you may not run things as another user unless you are an admin. So we have a problem only when you're an admin that you get a traceback. Let's have a look at the as command. All commands in Gitano run in three parts. A validate, which looks at the command line and tries to decide if it's valid. A prep, which runs any internal preparation necessary for the command, up to and including rule set checking. And then a run, which actually runs the command. Now all as does is do some checking up front and then call the command that you're trying to run as another user, for validation, for prep, and for running. Now, given that prep is when permissions are checked, we're going to need to put our check of whether or not the user is valid in the prep command. We can't put it in the validate command because then temp would be able to know whether or not a user existed purely by trying to run something as them. And that would be an information leak. So I'm going to have a go now at writing a patch for the prep command. We know all prep commands return two values, a result and a message. The result is either going to be nil in the case of a Lua error, false if something happened during rule set management that we weren't sure about, or otherwise the string allow or the string deny. In the case of all of those, MSG message is going to be a string that tells us what's going on. The only time that we want to check whether the user exists or not is if the rule set would otherwise have allowed the operation to occur, i.e. you're an admin and you're trying to do something to you're trying to do something as a user that you are permitted to try to do. So if res is equal to allow, then check to see if the user exists. And finally we're going to return res and message. So we need to check if the user exists or not. And this is really, really easy to do. If conf.users command line 2, and we know that it's command line 2 because we can see it here. If that is equal to nil, then the user simply doesn't exist. And we know it's conf.users because if we pull up config.lua and look at the end of the construction of the config object, we can see here that it's users. Ditto, if we wanted to check if a group name was valid, we could use groups. So if conf.users command line 2 is nil, then we were going to allow this, but the user doesn't exist. So res, message equals deny, user does not exist. Let's test that. First of all, as dsilvers, which is an admin. Temp works, so we haven't broken anything, and badger doesn't. Rule set denied action. Badger does not exist. Now what about as temp? You may not run things as another user unless you are an admin. So we haven't changed the error message from the one that we got before. So that's good. Let's have a quick check of the diff. Looks good to me. I'm going to commit that with message and we're done. We can now, because I'm me, pop that card into done. If it wasn't going to be such a quick fix, I really should have left it in doing in case it was going to take me a long time, but never mind. You should all be able to view the Trello for Gitano, and in fact you'll find that there is a Trello for Clod, for Gaul, for Supple, for Lace. All of these boards you can see and you can look at what's going on. Next time, in the using video, we'll be talking about actually using Lace to control access to Gitano instances. We'll be looking in more detail into the rule sets. And in the next hacking video, we're going to look at in more detail about how Lace is integrated into Gitano. And we may look and see if we can find a card related to Lace from the Trello and run with that. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.